Oh, I think Pete Liddell's just arrived, and I reckon that's probably full attendance. So you'll see
Yes.
we've got nice Atanas waiting patiently. We've had a quick chat about stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think everybody should really have already suffered, stroke, be familiar with everybody involved.
Yes.
And I mean, the whole idea of this chat was, I mean, to spread the stuff around a bit, because I don't want it all just to be sort of Rob and his terrible oppressive lighting again. I'd really like it to be a chance for everybody to share the stuff they do. And I was particularly, I think last year, everybody was struck by how nice Atanas's night dive pictures of little cuttlefish were. I had more cuttlefish than Atanas did on, I think, a couple of days later. But they were all squirting all over the place. They just never stayed still. So night dive cuttlefish is obviously an Atanas speciality. So what I was going to do, I was going to hand over to Atanas as host, and he runs it from now. You've got your talk in a couple of parts, so we were kind of going to save pictures on the first part until Atanas calls a break, pictures on the second part until the far end of the talk. And are you happy to take over?
Yes, definitely yes.
Okay, then I have made you better. You are now in charge.
Good. Okay. First, hello everyone anyway, and thank you for coming. I prepared a selection of pictures to share with you, and mostly taken during the few night dives I did in 2019. Easy shore dives from the beach in East Runton. And the second part of the chart is editing your pictures, and I will walk you through the way I edited one of my photos. At the first part, when I show you the pictures and before we go to the editing, if you have any questions, please ask, and at the end, when we finish with the editing part, again, any questions, please ask. Rob said that we have plenty of time. I'm not going to get tired, so you're welcome. And last year, I was particularly interested in the Bobtail Squid, as I have seen some really nice photos of this cute little animal taken by Rob and Dawn, but actually I haven't seen them myself. So the first encounter actually with these little animals happened for me last year. And the diving mission last summer was to locate some animals, enjoy their presence, of course, and hope to take some lovely images. The Bobtail squid is predominantly active during the night. Therefore, planning some night dives was on my list. And I'll share now some photos with you, and we'll carry on. So this is a photo of me taken by Mark Crane, and we'll speak about the equipment I'm using, and you'll see better how the equipment is set up. And I have a Nikon D7200 with a 60mm macro lens, and as you see, subsea +5 wet diopter on attached to a flip holder. By the way, not very useful with this setup, because the 60mm macro lens already has really short close minimum focus distance, so it would have made much more sense to use this diopter on a 100mm lens. Flashes, you see two Inon Z240 flashes. I usually place them close to each side of the port for macro photography. I also have two independent torches attached to my housing as a primary source of light. One of them is a backup. And one tool I would like to mention, which made a big difference for me last year, was the 45-degree viewfinder I have, and I acquired last season, and I was very pleased with it. The main benefits of using this viewfinder for me are comfortable body posture, hardly touching the seabed, as you see with your body, less strain on the neck muscles because of this natural body posture you adopt, and generally speaking, it's more comfortable to take pictures of benthic stuff. The whole assembly set is nearly neutrally buoyant in the water, which makes it easier for me to take photos using just one hand. When it's heavier, my right hand gets tired and hurts. And that's why you see plenty of floating buoyancy stuff around my equipment. This is just to make it neutrally buoyant. Camera settings. I usually shoot in manual mode most of the time, and during these night dives, I set the shutter speed to 320 of a second and didn't change it during the dives, and the aperture was between 14 and 16f. I didn't want to go beyond 16f because I would have not gained much of a depth of field, and diffraction hits hard after f16. So depth of field gain is a bit questionable for me after beyond f16 on this setup, of course. And now we'll move to the first picture. And this is one of the photos I hope to get, although I wasn't entirely happy with the background. I wanted a black background to allow the squid to pop out of it and have the viewer's eye on the animal. I managed to grab similar pictures on this dive, but not exactly what I wanted. Another thing about settings here is f16 as an aperture, and as well, as I said, the speed, shutter speed was 320 of a second. Flashes were close to the port, but because of the sun, and I didn't want to overexpose the sun, I lifted up the flashes at 10 o'clock, just a little above, just to not overexpose the sun. Next picture of this dive is another picture. Here, a different posture of the little cuttlefish. What I liked in this picture is the contrast between the yellow and the cyan on the animal. Flashes again, the same position, just try to avoid to overexpose the sun. This picture is a bit different because unusual posture of the animal, not usual posture, I can say. So it's a vertical. What I like in this picture is that you see really nice the features of the body parts, and fins of the animal are highlighted. Bulgings of the eyes are prominent, and both eyes are visible. Highlights area in the middle of the picture where the animal is, but still not black background as I wanted it. So, and this is one of the pictures which I took on my last dive. And I was really fortunate to encounter plenty of these little cuttlefish on my way back to the shore. In a small area of few square meters at the verge of the reef and the sandy region, there were more of a dozen of these animals, and most of them were in mid-water, probably feeding. The challenge was to keep them in the viewfinder in focus, and it was a difficult task because they were cruising around in a high speed, so really difficult task. And at the end, I was lucky to take few successful shots. The next shot is another similar shot, but from the tail of the animal. Here, I like the little colorful dots in the fins of the animal. And this is the best shot I managed to take last year, and it shows the animal in a specific photogenic posture, which allows direct eye contact with the viewer. Arms are spread in an attractive X shape, and the tentacles are coiled, ready to be launched. All of these contribute probably to the quality of this image. What I would like to mention as a technical stuff is that the lighting for these pictures on my last dive were different. Why? Because the animal were cruising around, as I said, in a high speed, in a high speed, and they were getting really close to my dome port, and I was having a hard time to lighten them. Actually, the first of my pictures were not well exposed, so I decided to change the position of the flashes. I pulled them away from the ports and turned them inwards at 90 degrees to the ports, and by doing so, I had a decent amount of light in front of the port. Also, it made the light looks like emitted from within the little cuttlefish. And because the flashes were away from the port, and as well, that increased the contrast between the shadows and the highlights, so gave a little bit of a depth, color depth of the picture between the shadows and the highlight areas. But during these dives, I came across different species as well, and to be honest, I haven't seen them before. For example, a possum shrimp I met for the first time, and I've seen it during this dive. That's the opossum shrimp. And as well, I've seen for the first time the sun smelt. And this is a picture of the sun smelt. Another species I encountered was, for instance, this is two-spotted goby, and it was really nice. I spent more than 5 minutes at this area because that goby really enjoyed my beam of light and used it to hunt its prey. So it was just playing in front of my port, feeding, and I was taking plenty of pictures of it. It was fun. And usually it's possible to get closer to animals at night and allows anybody to take close-up portraits of common species, and such as this rock goby. Rob, is that a rock goby or a black goby? I'm not sure, to be honest.
I think it's probably black. Unfortunately, the gobies are all pretty similar, but I think you can see that there are sort of scar lines on its cheek.
Good.
Those are supposedly the lines of papillae, and that's a sign of a black goby. And black
good.
gobies are rarely black. So
yeah, it's a bit colorful. But anyway, good. Thank you. And this is another common species you can encounter, but during the night, you can get really close and take picture of this corkwing wrasse. And as well, stalked jellies were difficult to spot at the beginning of the summer, but then they become a bit more common at the end. And thanks to Rob, he pointed it out to me, I managed to take this picture last year. Another thing I would like to mention, which is a little bit away from the night shots, is that I had another, to say, desire, aim last year. That was to take a decent picture of nudibranch, because I didn't have any decent image of these animals. So I would like to share a couple of pictures I took last year of nudibranchs. And this is one of them. I just like how the animal is lighted. The position of the strobes hasn't been any different. They were close to the port, but pointed inwards. So just to light up the animal. And the best picture I took is this picture of nudibranch last year. And that's actually the last picture I wanted to share with you. I've done plenty other pictures, of course, but that's worth sharing with you. And now that's the end of the first part. And anybody, please ask any questions if you have on these pictures, any questions about equipment. And after your questions, we'll carry on with something else, with the editing pictures, of course.
Excellent. While they get their courage up, I'll ask you a couple of questions. You said you had a few successes. What kind of success rate do you feel you had?
Actually, very low. I can say, let's say I usually take on an average dive about 300 shots, and usually successful shots are less than 10.
So is that what you consider a creatively successful shot, or one that's just sharp?
Creative shots. Yes, I'm interested in the artistic way of showing the animals, and I'm really pleased when I'm able to show a common species in an unusual way. So people are attracted, like many people are visiting and diving our Norfolk coast, but very few appreciate the common species we have. So one of the way of showing common species as an exceptional species is my aim, part of my photography.
Yeah, I think that's a good stuff. And I always think there's sort of three phases to dive photography. There's sort of just having a bare record that you were there, having nice ID shots, which are just sort of, I mean, flat-on spotter shots, and then your sort of top echelon is to be sort of artistically pleased with what you've shot, having it nicely lit and positioned. And I think all of them are completely reasonable reasons for having a nice dive and taking pictures.
Absolutely.
But the success rate falls. If you're only after a record of where you've been, that's pretty easy. If you're taking ID shots, that's a bit more of a challenge. But then sort of, if you're after something that's creatively pleasing, you're going to be down to a much lower strike rate because the animal's not cooperating, it's dark, and it's harder to focus, and then you've got your lighting to sort out. Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah, it looks to me as though Pete had unmuted himself and was preparing a question.
Oh, yes. Anybody, please.
I was thinking about it. Anyway, Atanas,
Yes.
did you say you're using a diopter
Yes.
a wet diopter? Is
Yes.
that for all images?
No, actually, I used it not very often. I just more like practicing it with it. But Pete, it was useless with this lens because you gain advantage of this wet diopter when your closest focus distance of the lens is not quite close, and the wet diopter just make it much closer and magnifying. But with my lens, 60mm lens, you imagine the minimum focus distance is only 18 millimeters.
Yeah.
So the wet diopter doesn't contribute nearly nothing. It would have made sense on a 100mm lens because the 100mm lens, the minimum focus distance is about 32 millimeters. So on this setup I had, a bit useless is this wet diopter.
Yeah, it will be. And if you're using the 60, your working distance between the front of the port and your subject will be very small.
Yes.
And from that, I don't know if you've tried the 105, but your working distance will be greater. Maybe not by a great deal, but every little helps from that.
Yes.
It depends on the size of your subject and your magnification.
Yeah, it's probably worth saying. So we've got Penny and Pete P in, and they've got TGs, sort of Olympus TGs, and so all this talk of focal length doesn't necessarily mean much to everyone. But Atanas's 60mm is on a Nikon with a medium-sized sensor, and so in old money, it's the equivalent of a 90mm. And that's a little bit less powerful than your TGs, Pete and Penny, when fully zoomed in. So I think operationally, it's a similar view. And like Atanas, sort of people will often buy the TGs and say, oh, I must buy a macro lens. And you say, well, why? Why do you want the macro lens when the TG can pretty much focus on its own glass?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yep. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
The TG also has that ring light thing. I don't know how useful that is, but underwater anyway.
I think the ring light, I just use that on land. I don't think it works with the housing, because you have to put a separate fitting on it. So I don't think I've never put it inside I don't think it fits inside the housing.
Using the TG with the housing, then no, it won't, because it's designed to fit directly onto the camera.
Yeah, I mean, and again, with the TG, you've got different lighting challenges, because with Atanas's SLR, the lens sticks out the front and you can move lights around it. Whereas with the TG, the camera's almost flat. So you can get right up to, you're physically very close to things, but the point you're taking the pictures isn't ahead of you. So it's very easy. Well, it's quite hard because you've got to light down the front. But that being said, at these kinds of distances, the internal flash will actually work reasonably because you're so close and there's no shadowing.
Absolutely. I have a Sony X, I think 100, little camera, and when I shoot with it and using the internal flash, I have really nice, successful photos with internal flash. Definitely, yes.
Yeah, I think they work nicely for close-up photos because, I mean, to get the nice black backgrounds or to create strong shadow, you're after creating a strong light gradient. And with the compact cameras, you can get very close and their little sort of almost on-axis flashes hit your subject first, and thereafter the scene is all getting darker.
Absolutely.
And so you can do cunning things like turn your compact upside down, and then the light will shoot sort of up into your subject, and then the subject will cast shadow behind, and that can help you get a black background, especially with things on the edge. But I thought, I mean, Atanas's sort of black stuff is nice. It's a thing that, I mean, I've tended not to do because we've been after more kind of in situ, but utterly in keeping with the night dive because it is the aesthetic of the animal appearing out of the dark. So beautiful stuff, and never successfully identified a sand smelt at all.
That was a nice encounter, really. It was just amazing, actually, to encounter those animals. And to be honest, I tend to do much more night dives this coming season because of the reason I've seen plenty just during the day. It's very difficult to see those animals, and not just that, but during the night you can observe behavior of these animals you can't see during the day.
So what time of year do you do your night dives?
Anytime actually which the sea state and the weather allows, but usually from July till September, I can say. Okay,
so you're diving very late at night?
Yes, sometime up to midnight.
I think on the whole, we tend, I think the way the season works is we tend to get overexcited at the start of the season and you dive more during the day. And then later on in August, September, we start to wonder about doing new and different things. And we tend to do the night dives a little bit later, and that brings the dark more manageably into
dark at sort of 9 o'clock or so, rather than 11.
Yeah, and not to say we don't go in late, but it's sort of 9, or we go in at twilight, and you have an hour and a bit, and it goes dark while you're out. And I was going to say, Atanas was diving at East Runton. We all went in, Penny, Atanas, and I think.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, yeah.
We had a really nice dive.
And that's one of the places we choose for night diving because it's got a very easy approach. It's quite hard to hurt yourself at East Runton. I also had great sort of spotting success, though not photographic success, at Weybourne, where I dived with Kat Gerasimova, who's unfortunately not here. And that's where we saw lots more little cuttlefish. So that's another sandy site with sort of close-in chalk. So I think night diving looks productive, and we should try to do a bit more.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
It's
something I want to do some more of, certainly.
Yeah. Before I invite Atanas to move on to part 2, I should say, can you quickly check, Atanas, that you haven't got anybody else waiting to get in? Because I can't see that.
Rob, I can't see anything, but should I bring it back to you just in case you want to check? Or so we have 6 participants.
If you've got 6 participants and you haven't got anybody waiting, then that's fine.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
It's an unexpected excitement of handing you being host, is that I can't see the waiting room now. So I was just checking. Because I've done these talks, and people like Chris and Inga have turned up at some point, and we've been sort of full bore explaining the most fascinating thing in the world, and only spotted them later on. And I don't know whether they've been there forever or whether they've just arrived. But if you check, we've done due diligence.
That will be pity if somebody wants to join, and we're not going to allow somebody to join. By the way, I think, Rob, if somebody wants to come, a little pop-up window comes. So, but yeah, we are 6 participants, so we can carry on.
Okay, great.
All right.
Over to you.
Okay. So we'll move now to the editing part, and it is necessary in order to squeeze the best out of your field work, actually. That's the extra mile, as they said. And shooting in RAW format is the obvious choice, if you have this option, of course, because it gives more flexibility and it's non-destructive. You can convert one RAW file thousands, many of times without making any damage. I have a slideshow and we'll follow each step I'm going through. So I will share a screen with you at the moment. Yes. And good. Okay. So we start with establishing a workflow. What this means is pardon me, we'll carry on now. So the workflow, it's the meaning of having a steps to follow, and usually we start with the global problems first, and then we move to the local correction, regional corrections. And by the way, before I start, does everybody see clearly the slides? Good.
That's fine. Yeah.
Good. Excellent. So this is the steps I usually do of any picture I'm editing. First, I'm confirming that I have the color management I set. Then raw file processing. You can do it in your favorite raw converter. I usually doing it in Photoshop, but I tried many other raw converters and all of them are similar. Then you check for backscatter and noise removal. You can do it in the raw converter as well. Capture sharpening, color balance and setting white and black points using levels or any other tool, your favorite tool you can use for that as well. And then global tonal and color correction by levels or any other tool. And next step is the regional or local tonal and color correction using absolutely the same tools but applying them locally. And the final step is creative sharpening. Is not always necessary, but you can improve significantly your picture with creative sharpening. So here we are in the raw converter. could be any RAW converter. This is Adobe Camera Raw. It's an old one. By the way, this is Photoshop 6. What I'm doing here and what I'm checking first is if I assign the proper color space for the file I'm converting. I'm using ProPhoto RGB color space. Why? Because it's one of the widest color spaces, and I make sure by assigning this color profile that no color of my captured file will be lost. In the other color profile spaces, they are a bit smaller, and sometimes your capture consists of colors which not going to be captured, they're going to be cut. It's not a significant difference, but if you want the ultimate best quality, this is the color space of choice. One disadvantage, by the way, if you choose this color space, is that you need to keep your files in 16 bits. Why is this? Is because if you have very smooth areas in your file, if you choose to go to the 8 bits version, you need a lot of data in these smooth areas, and if you go to the 8 bits, you might get some banding later on. So if you don't want to keep your files in 16 bits, you'd better choose Adobe RGB color space or sRGB color space. By the way, I will admit one more. Yes, somebody wants to join us.
Okay.
Okay, I'll kill now. So it's not a big deal, but as I said, if you want the ultimate, it's ProPhoto, but you need to keep it in 16 bits. This is a Lightroom. If anybody using Lightroom, you just set up the same settings in Lightroom. This is Photoshop, exactly what we already said, is assigning a color space. And then we are coming to process our file. What I put here is something I bought Alec Masters' photography masterclass book, and I can say that he explained really well how to convert your RAW files over there. And if you are really interested in underwater photography, it's one of the best books for underwater photography. What I do in the RAW processor, I pay more attention to the white balance. Why I pay attention to the white balance? Because if you don't nail the white balance, your colors are muddy, not clear, they are not vibrant, because you have a color cast. And the color cast doesn't allow your colors to pop out. So what I'm trying first in the RAW converter is to get the white balance right. Then I adjust the exposure, a little bit of a contrast, but that's not the most important bit. For me, the most important bit is the white balance. Another recommendation I would like to tell you, which is important for me because I do a lot of printing of the files, is I edit my pictures on a white background. Why I'm doing this? On a white background, you are much more aware of the brightness of your picture, and especially your shadows. If you edit on a white background, you tend to brighten up much more your backgrounds and the whole picture. And that is a huge benefit when you start printing your pictures. because most of the people complaining when they start printing their pictures that prints are coming too dark. That's one of the way to avoid dark pictures. We are still in the raw converter of any choice, and backscatter removal is the next step. Camera Raw has spot removal tool, healing or clone. You have the same in Photoshop, and these tools are available from any, I believe, raw converter these days. The following step is capture sharpening. Why you need capture sharpening? Because the process of converting your files, you lose some details. Because of this process, the files you get are a little bit blurred, and by capture sharpening, you're bringing back this lost sharpness, this detail which is lost when you convert your files. You can do that in any raw converter, by the way, this capture sharpening. It's available in Lightroom and I believe in any raw converter. I'm doing it in Photoshop because I like this plugin, sharpening plugin, which is Focus Magic is called. It's a Photoshop plugin I'm using, I get used to it and I really like it. But you can do it in anything. You just need to remember that it's a good thing to do capture sharpening before you carry on with your processing. And now we're coming to Photoshop, and this is the first step of editing my picture. As you noticed, I already said that white balance for me is very important. And that's why when I open the picture in Photoshop, the first thing is I'm opening levels. You can do that, by the way, in curves on other tools. It's not necessary to be levels. What I do is I'm opening up levels and then I'm clicking on options. When you click on options, you get that little pop-up window, and I select find dark and light colors. Then when you see below shadows, I select less than 1% for shadows and less than 1% for highlights. Why? Because I don't want to lose details in the shadows and in the highlights. Once I do these settings, I click OK, and then next time, anytime I come in Photoshop and I click and I open up levels, when I click on auto, this process will be done automatically for me. By the way, and this process is actually setting up your white point and black point. You're gonna ask me why we need this. So blacks, you don't want blacks which has color casts. So you don't want greenish blacks, you don't want bluish blacks or any other color cast in it. In whites, it is the same. You want pure white. It's not all the time, but most of the time you would like this. And these levels that way allows you to set up your white point and black point without any color casts. It doesn't do magics, by the way, doesn't work all the time. If it doesn't work, what I do is I'm open up each channel, red, green, and blue, and I do these adjustments on the black and the white point for each individual channel. And here you can see the difference. It's not a huge difference. It's a subtle difference, if you can see it. By the way, on this screen, you might not see any difference. But you can see that the blue is a bit much more bluer and deeper, and overall is much more neutral picture. on the left side before is much more cyanish going to. It's a subtle difference. You don't chase huge difference. Next step, I open up selective color. What I've done here is I click on colors cyan and I removed nearly all of the cyan. That way I improved the blues in the color. In the blues, actually, I improved them, make it much more deeper. But it's not a huge improvement. Actually, I can skip this stage, to be honest. And one of the reasons actually I've done this is because I'm printing on Epson, old Epson 4880 A2 printer, and that printer doesn't print cyan very well. So that's one of the reasons. So don't read too much behind this step. But I can tell you one tip, which I'm usually doing. Most of the underwater photography has blues in it. And one way to improve the blues is, look at this selective color. You just need to go to colors, but instead of cyan, you select blues. And when you select blues, if you remove the yellow just slightly, you make the blues much more vibrant, much more brighter. And if you want to darken them, just add a little bit black. If you want to make them brighter, just remove some blacks. That's a good thing and works all the time for me when you have nice blues. Here, now we're coming to the regional or local adjustments. And on this picture, I wanted to make the fish a little bit more darker. That's why I opened curves and applied darkening curve. And instead of the whole picture, I only painted here the areas I want them darker. So it's around the eye of the fish and part of the fish. You can see before and after, it's hardly noticeable, but all the changes I do, they are very subtle and they add up to each other on each level. The second, the second regional adjustments I've done is I wanted to increase the contrast of the fish just a little bit. So what I've done is I applied a S curve, and then I only paint the areas I wanted actually this contrast to be applied. So again, around the eye here, you can see a little more contrast and a little bit more difference between the shadows and highlights. And you see these black dots I've done, that is areas which I didn't want the contrast to be applied. That is around the eye. Actually, this yellow didn't like that contrast very much, so I removed it. And at this stage, I thought I improved the picture enough. I didn't want to carry on anymore, and I've done a print, and I was happy with the print. And here I stopped. My master file was already done. But I would like to mention something. Before I print, I'm applying one specific mid-tone contrast enhancing layer. It's a method created by and applied by Mac Halbert. It's one of the pioneers of the digital printing. I created on I created auto layer for this enhancing layer, actually automated process, which you can, just to make it clearer, I made an action in Photoshop, and if anybody wants this action, I can give it to you. It's something which enhance your layer, your picture, and gives something like enhancing the local contrast, and gives you like a three-dimensional way of representing the picture. It's not a huge difference, but it's a subtle difference. But when you print it and compare prints, actually you can see the difference. But as I said, this is only for printing. It's not gonna benefit if you apply that for online or sharing on the social media or something. And finally, take a look. This is my layer stack after all the editing done. And just to summarize, you have the backscatter and healing bottom layer. Then it comes capture sharpening, just to bring back this lost sharpening from the conversion from raw to your favorite file format. I'm converting to TIFF usually. And then you have the global and tonal and white balance using levels. Another global selective color we have. And on the top of those, we have two regional adjustments, one for a bit darkening of the fish, and the other one is for improving the contrast of the fish. And this top layer, as I said, this top layer is only for printing and usually is off. Is on only when I print. And here we are. This is the last words. I completed what I wanted to say. It's a huge, by the way, topic. We can talk and talk and talk about it. So I'm now stop the sharing, and I'll bring back control to Rob.
Ooh.
And then I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Excellent stuff. And I think it's probably, bewildering to quite a lot of people, and a lot of work. So like I asked with your strike rate of pictures that you were pleased with on a dive, how many pictures do you think you processed to that degree, I guess, during a dive season?
Only, Rob, first, what I do is, when I download the whole capture for the dives, when I come back home, I do selections. And usually I'm coming up with 10, maximum 15 photos. And from these photos, probably I'm gonna decide to process 5 or 6. And many of them, for example, I might be very enthusiastic to do, but then later on I'm a bit disappointed because, you know, after time you've seen you see the pictures differently. And many pictures I process only on the raw stage, and I said, that's not gonna do, so I'm not gonna carry on any other editing. Probably on a day shooting, I'm gonna fully process only handful of pictures.
Okay, and I think that's a useful thing to bear in mind, because when people talk about sort of a workflow, often normal people will go, that's a lot of work. I've taken 300 pictures, or maybe they haven't taken that many, and they'll go, I couldn't process that many pictures, and you don't.
But you don't need to, yes.
Yeah, you're
absolutely.
quite selective about your work, and so you can afford to spend more time on the ones you want to polish and fully explore. And
absolutely.
And that's, I mean, a very sort of like salient point is to decide what you want to do with your pictures. There's like lots of people are pleased to have a pleasant picture they can pop onto Facebook. They might never exploit it beyond that. And Facebook is not a very testing way to show a picture. And sort of kind of the 2-minute tweaks we did a few weeks back will make something look sparkly for Facebook. But Atanas is working hard and crafting these pictures for a much more, I guess, sort of, a revealing medium. If you're going to print something, how big do you print these, Atanas?
I print A2 is the biggest because my printer is A2, but actually I can print on roll paper, which is, let's say, could be meters, but still I'm restricted by the width of the printer, which is, A2. So maximum A2, but bear in mind, I print some pictures much bigger, A0, but I gave it to online services.
Yeah, I have one picture I printed at A0 once, and I've never committed to framing it because it seemed like such a big piece of work. So it's still rolled up upstairs. We've got some around here, and things sort of around A3 is a nice big print. I guess A2 is about 60 centimeters by 42 centimeters. Yeah. So that's a small poster.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, and hung on a wall, you can walk right up to it. It's a little bit smaller than it's sort of around the size of a large television. And televisions you view from the other side of the room, but a picture you will walk up to. So crafting with this care is justified because it's going to be examined.
Yes, definitely. And I can tell you that I started to pay much more attention to the editing when I started printing, because when you first time you look something on the monitor and you are excited to say how nice it is, beautiful, you want to print it. But when I start printing, I said, what the crap coming off the printer? And so this encouraged me to start paying attention much more to the picture, because what you see on the monitor in most cases is not what's gonna come up off the printer. That's the big trouble. And that now I'm to the stage where when I see a picture, I know straight away how it's gonna come up off the printer without even touching the picture. And I know if I want to print that picture the certain way I wanted it, so I'm applying a certain way of editing as well. So usually my editing is confined on the way I would like the picture to come off the printer.
Yeah, I think that's it. And having an idea of a target, how it's going to end up, is key. And the things you mentioned about your color management and the color space.
Oh, yes.
It's really worth mentioning to people that by default, almost all cameras are sRGB.
Yes.
And if you don't want to think about this stuff, that's the default. That's pretty much what's used, broadly speaking, on laptops and computers. And with adjustment means that you'll get what you expect on a computer, televisions are slightly different, and so things tend to look more contrasty. So there you run into an interesting problem. And printing is another color space again. So if you're going to move outside of the original color space into a television or print, that's when you have to start considering color management, and you have to start working in the color space that you want to produce for.
Very, very good point. Very good point, Rob. And yes, I would like to not scare the people, and just to a little bit explain that ProPhoto RGB color spaces. I'm a bit about it because when I print and I'm sometimes creating color, custom color profiles, and some of the colors in a special way, I mean, the printer custom color profile sometimes is bigger than sRGB and Adobe RGB in a certain areas. And that's why I'm just processing it in the ProPhoto, because sometimes I get colors which actually I can print. Very rare, by the way, because to gain from the ProPhoto color space is only in very vibrant, saturated colors, in a deep shadows, but in, let's say, 95% of the file, you're not gonna get the benefits of this ProPhoto color space. It's a bit of a, when I mention it, probably, I should have not mentioned it probably, because the gain is so little that probably even I should have not mentioned it.
I think it's a gain in the subtlety, and I think that the colours on the little cuttlefish were beautiful, and probably the thing you could remark on is that they were very rich, very saturated. There was great contrast in the colours, and that working in more sort of, working less carefully, you tend to oversaturate the colours and lose the distinction between them. Mm-hmm. And if you're sharing to Facebook, or you're knocking out a photo set of, say, 40 or 50 from a dive, which we sometimes do, then you accept that because you know you're not going to be able to examine it. And so I can see where the work has gone in. And it's worth knowing you can. I think worth mentioning these things, but trying to set it in a context where you don't have to do that. And if you were only going to produce nice little Facebook galleries, you won't benefit from it. It will be too subtle.
Absolutely, and will be useless. Actually, unnecessary work. Unnecessary work. What I was speaking is just the ultimate you can get. But Rob, you are fine. If you don't put this in context, doesn't mean anything. Actually, 99% of the things and the photo you take, you don't need these things I'm talking about.
Well, definitely. And I think, like Atanas has said, you might find that lots of your pictures you are completely happy with, but after a while you think that is a special picture. And the idea of non-destructive editing starts with always keeping your originals in the best condition possible.
Yes.
So that if you change your mind later on, if that picture, you discover that you've discovered a unique species, or it's the only view of something, you want to return to it, you can retrospectively do more work. You don't want to burn your bridges by processing the original and losing it to create a new one. Keep your old stuff, and then a few years down the line, you might think, actually, I've learnt a new technique, or now I want to produce a gallery in the west wing of my house, and it's worth now returning. And I've got pictures like that, not beautiful pictures like that, but ones where I thought that was always a nice picture, and now I understand some more. I can make a better version of it.
Yeah. Yes.
Through. Yeah. Like other things I was going to mention is hopefully for Pete P and Penny, when we talked about tweaking before, you can see these are subtler and more developed versions of what we did with your pictures of sort of crabs and prawns, where we looked at sort of highlights and midtones and shadows. And the thing here is those adjustments were, I mean, by eye, and Atanas is doing these with protection of sort of losing material at either end, where we were just sort of seeing what we liked. Similar controls, but in the color controls Atanas was using, they were much more subtle. Ours were pretty brutal, but again, it depends what you want to do. If you're working on a handful of pictures over sort of from a week away, spend lots of time on them. If you're trying to produce a gallery of 20, 30, 40 from a day's diving for Facebook, you don't want to spend half an hour on each picture. You can't. And then you just cut your cloth to get the result you want. And none of that means that you can't go back and do extra work later on. That's a thing, I think. There's a difference between sort of crafting and just sort of polishing.
Absolutely, yes. But it's good people to know both ways. So they know that they have the option to extra polish it, but it's not always, and actually it's an extra bit. You don't need doing it. If you are happy with what you have, many times I've taken photo and actually printed it straight away, and I was happy with it. You need to just consider your options, and you don't need to straight away jump on full editing, and especially on a picture, you know, not something exceptional.
I'm sure everything that Pete and Penny do is exceptional. I know everything I do is exceptional.
Yeah.
It was extremely helpful going through, for Atanas to go through that pathway that he takes. Obviously, you've got fantastic end result with your very select pictures, but just having a rough, that guide through the steps that he takes was very useful.
I think so too.
And by the way, I didn't explain much, but there is a reason why you need to do this step before the other step. So it's not good way of doing all the steps, but in random order. So they need to always follow this selective order. I mean, you can't do, for example, let's say, creative sharpening without already done the capture sharpening, for example.
Yeah, I mean, this is true even for lower level fiddling.
Absolutely.
If you, and usually it works better with some of the programs we saw last time. If you did your sort of black and white point setting, if you did what I was calling a simple sort of histogram equalize, you made the dark bit black and the white bits white, and then you adjust the color, you'll find that any adjustment that turns anything up will crush and you'll clip.
Yeah.
So in that simple mode, you want to get the color right whilst your picture's not fully expanded, not had its contrast maximized. Otherwise you'll lose stuff. So you get get the color right in that instance,
Yes.
and then sort of push white to white and black to black. And I wasn't saying that was a good thing to do, but that's an instance where it's easy to see what you'd lose. If you sort of turn the contrast up first of all, and then do the color, anything that, say, increased the red would probably sort of push it beyond
Yes,
maximum.
It's very easy to overdoing it. It's very easy.
Yeah, I mean, you see it a lot on Facebook pictures. People will have a one button correct, and it will have really tweaked the hell out of stuff, and you can see it just looks it looks wrong.
Yeah.
Excellent. Ooh, I'm sure I had another question. I had a good question, I think. So I do all my stuff just on a laptop, and I thought the suggestion of editing against a white background was a good one, because it gives you an idea of sort of the color cast itself. Normally I make my pictures big and see if I like them.
Yeah.
So I'm missing out on that reference. Are you using a laptop, or are you using a super duper monitor that you have color calibrated?
Yes, the monitor is calibrated, but it's not super duper. But Rob, actually, I don't see a problem editing your picture on a laptop, but unfortunately, my laptop is a low budget laptop. So if you have a good laptop, then it's fine. But most of my editing I'm doing on a normal screen. Of course, I calibrate the screen to just get the colors right. But when I say that, on most nowadays monitors, they are straight off the shop, really, really good already. So one important thing for the monitors I would like to emphasize is brightness. Brightness for me is more important than the colors of the monitor, because many people editing their picture on a really, really bright laptops or monitors beyond 250 candles and stuff, and these make their picture really dark because they don't have a sense how bright the picture is. And when you have a bright picture, you tend to darken your picture when you have a very bright monitor. So my recommendation is you should not go beyond 120 lumens before that. So your brightness of the monitor should be much lower.
Okay, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, often you see, or probably not often, because it's only a thing nerds would do, but you'd see someone selling, like Wex in Norwich, selling an eArmor super duper monitor, and it'll have a shade, and that's so you can have it is protected from ambient light. So you can afford to have the screen itself slightly dimmer, because usually you get to choose, don't you? You can have a good screen or a bright screen. And I know my weird sort of fighting laptop has a super bright screen that supposedly you can use outdoors.
Yeah.
And that's not subtle.
Yes.
When I worked in television stuff, we had reference monitors, and they were distinctly dim because they were subtle.
Yes.
They weren't super bright. So it's worth considering, and that's a basic piece of calibration. Can you see all the steps from black to white, or is a hell of a lot of your picture actually just off the top end?
One important bit, actually, thank you, Rob. By the way, you mentioned that, but when I said the brightness, you can't take it by itself. You need to consider the brightness in the room as well. So if your room lighting in the room is very bright, of course you need to make your monitor a bit brighter. But if we speak about dim lighting in the room, your monitor should come down as well. In the room, I usually editing my picture, the light is constant, never changes, is the same strength bulb, and usually it's a daylight bulb, so it's not color cast, it's not a warmer or a cooler light, it's a daylight bulb, and it's always constant. And my monitor as well, I never changed the brightness as well.
Yeah, I think that's a piece of self-calibration, isn't it? So you know what you're looking at because you're familiar with the setting.
Absolutely, yes.
If you're sort of in and out doing this kind of work, turning
that makes
from
difference,
windows,
yes.
yeah, it's going to be harder.
Yes, definitely.
Excellent. Has anybody got any more questions for Atanas?
Yes. Shoot me.
Bang. Atanas, the mid-tone contrast layer that you use, is that specifically because you're using the printer that you're using?
It's not specific for my printer. It's gonna benefit for any printer. So if you have a home printer, doesn't matter what printer, your file is gonna benefit if this layer is applied. And if you use Photoshop, I can give you the file so you can try it for yourself.
Okay, yeah, I'd be interested to at least try it and see the difference.
Yes.
I use another A2 printer, the 3880. So it's
3880. That's a nice printer. Very good printer.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's obsolete now, but hey, it's still one of the best of that size.
Yes. But by the way, this action, this layer, once you applied it on the top of your picture, you can change the opacity, the strength. Yeah. So if it's subtle, if you want much more prominent to be in your print, you can increase it. Yeah. Or decrease it if it's too much.
Yeah. Presumably you can also use masks to accentuate particular areas of the image.
Yes.
Rather than just all of it.
Yes.
Like any other. So.
Yeah. But this particular layer actually increasing the local contrast on the whole picture. So it's applied to the whole picture. Any area of the picture actually benefits from this layer.
All right. Yeah, I'll be interested in that.
Do you use Photoshop?
Yes.
So that's fine. I'll give it to you, and you will give it a go.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Definitely. Especially if you have this printer, that's a great printer you have.
Yeah, I unfortunately don't use it enough, but then I don't take pictures enough either at the minute. But yes, I'll connect with you on Facebook.
Yes.
We'll go from there.
Yes, and then and I will. You can get the file, and I will give you as well. It's from Mark Colbert, exactly the explanation how to use it. So it's no-brainer to try it.
Thank you. Yeah, interested.
Yeah, good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. I was just going to quickly interject.
Yes.
We did. I think when I don't know if you were there, Atanas, we did a sort of a simpler tweaking kind of session. And I kind of mentioned...
No, I missed it, unfortunately. Sorry.
Well, it was rubbish. It would have been just wasted on you. It would be too basic for you. But I mentioned there that the tweaks we did were global. We didn't do, I don't think we did anything that picked out particular parts of a picture. It was all sort of the contrast of the overall picture, color of the overall picture, and it kind of assumed, well, that was a limitation. Whereas Atanas is talking of sort of masking and using those mask areas so you could sort of adjust a particular fish in this instance. Like the emperor was adjusted, and that's again a nice thing to do because you can selectively sharpen or adjust the important parts of a picture. Or often, I think my classic thing is you light the scenery nicely, but the fish is actually very disappointing. It's hiding behind a rock. And I think we looked at a squat lobster where you could make the squat lobster right, but it knackered the whole scene, or you could make the scene right and the squat lobster was too dark. And so the masking and that selective adjustment is the antidote to that.
Absolutely. And by the way, I would like to mention something. It's very easy to do. It's just the layer masks comes automatically, and you just need to select the brush to select only the areas to apply the change. It's just one click. It's a piece of cake.
Excellent. And I think that's motivational. Right. Yeah. I think I'm exhausted, mainly because I was awake all night throwing up. But that's neither here nor there.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yes, well, it's the way I prefer things like this. So if we haven't got any further questions, I think probably let Atanas have some tea. So I'd say thank you ever so much, Atanas. It's been really nice to have that. I think Pete's idea of a quick round of applause is a good one.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you
ever so much.
Thank you very much.